Welcome to the STEM Pathways podcast, where we delve into the fascinating world of science, technology, engineering, and math. I'm your host, Rohan Sharma, a passionate explorer of all things STEM. Each episode, we bring you captivating stories, cutting-edge research, and inspiring interviews with experts and enthusiasts who are pushing the boundaries of innovation. Whether you're a student, a professional, or just curious about how the world works, join us as we unlock the mysteries of the universe and explore the endless possibilities of STEM. Let's get started. Today, I'll be interviewing Adam Cotton, who has a bachelor's in chemistry from Harvard and Ph.D. in chemistry and chemical biology from the University of California, San Francisco. How are you doing today?
Good. Nice to meet you, Rohan, and thanks for the nice introduction.
Yeah, thank you for joining me on the podcast. So to start off with, I wanted to ask what you did in high school.
Yeah, so whilst I am in America now, I actually grew up in the United Kingdom. So I grew up in all the high school system in the UK, which is a little different to what you do in America. And I came to America just for college. So up until the age of 19, I was over there. In terms of high school, so the UK system, we have a system called A levels or GCSEs and then A levels. So equivalent of high school in the US, it lasts 4 years. Your freshman and sophomore year, you would do something called GCSEs, where you somewhat specialize. You pick a number of subjects that you want to do. Everyone has to do kind of the English, math, science, and then you can pick some other topics on top of that. And then for your last 2 years, what we do A levels, you actually just pick 4 subjects that you want to just truly focus on. So instead of doing kind of your general English, math, science that everybody has to do, you kind of just pick what those 4 are. For me, I chose further math, which is just more math, I suppose, and then chemistry and biology were my 4 subjects that I studied the last 2 years of high school. So very STEM focused. My goal at that point was to go and do a degree in chemistry, which obviously turned out that's what I ended up doing, and I chose my subjects accordingly. Obviously has its pluses and minuses, that the UK system, but for me, it worked out. For others, maybe if you don't know exactly what you want to do, it's not the best system, because you pretty much have to pick at the age of 16 what you want to do for university.
Yeah. So knowing that you did a bachelor's at Harvard for chemistry, what extra things did you do outside of school while you were in high school?
Yeah, so I ran track. So I was an athlete growing up. I liked school, was pretty good at school in high school, but that wasn't always the case, I suppose. I didn't really, get excited by schooling until probably would have been my sophomore year, probably my sophomore year in high school, where I just had a math teacher that, helped me kind of fall in love with math, science, kind of thinking critically about problems. Before then, I was always, a decent student, but, didn't, love school that much. It was so, I spent more of my time, outside playing, kicking the ball around, and doing sport. And so for me, my extracurricular was, growing up was tennis. And then partway through high school, I switched to being a track athlete. So I used to run the 800 and the mile. And then, got decently good at that sport, and was able to kind of use that to help me get into universities over here in America. So I was a D1 track athlete at Harvard and was recruited in. So that was my major extracurricular that kind of enabled me to get into Harvard.
Yeah. If I'd asked, what was your mile time?
So we run the 1500 in the UK, not quite the mile, but it's equivalent of around a 357, 358 was what I ran back then. So my collegiate career was not so good. I had a lot of injuries and had Achilles surgery, but enjoyed my time enough as a collegiate athlete, but didn't see the successes I always dreamed of doing. That's all.
Yeah. So moving on to your time at Harvard, what was that like?
It was good. I suppose I have I feel like I have a very different experience to most of that. One being an international student in Harvard, and two, feeling like I didn't fit in too well, especially in my early years. I actually I really kind of just didn't like being at Harvard for my first couple of years, I suppose, until I found kind of my group of friends, both kind of around the track and then also around science. That I found kind of like people I was more, had similar backgrounds to, that, really enjoyed my time at Harvard. It opened a lot of doors, but, I found the first couple of years tough to I just felt like I didn't fit in very well. But, that's just, a lot of people go through that at university, and, I definitely did. My last 2 years, I kind of joined a lab to start doing research. My junior year, I joined Matt Scher's lab in the chemistry department, and we were pretty much doing just, total synthesis, organic chemistry. And I was on a really, really cool project, and, really then once I did that and started more interacting with kind of the faculty in the chemistry department and the PhD students, I really started, enjoying Harvard, doing the Harvard experience much more, realized kind of the doors that it opens up for you in terms of the contacts and the people you get to talk with, and work alongside. You know, through that experience, I ended up really, really enjoying my time at Harvard. And by the end, my last couple of years, and obviously enjoyed Harvard and chemistry and being in America enough that I'm, still here in the similar industry now, nearly 10 years later. So.
Yeah. So after Harvard, I saw that you did an MBA. What made you make that decision?
Yeah, so my goal after undergrad is I did chemistry undergrad at Harvard, and worked in a lab. Kind of my goal was to always go do a chemistry PhD, in some sort of chemistry, chemical biology related field. And that was always my plan, and that was, always on the cards in terms of what I was going to do. But, as I mentioned, I was a track athlete at Harvard. Also mentioned I had a lot of injuries. So because of those injuries, I had extra eligibility. And then weird Ivy League rules, you have to leave after 4 years. So I had extra eligibility. I just couldn't use it at Harvard. So I had to go elsewhere. So, look for a school that I could go run at, and chose University of New Mexico, which, has been for quite a while now one of the best middle to long distance colleges in the nation. So I went there to run primarily, and, I was always interested in terms of the degree of doing an MBA. I was always interested in biotech pharma. That was kind of what my always had in mind that was going to be my goal after my PhD, less so academia. And I thought an MBA would be a great opportunity to learn about business and how these companies kind of run from a day-to-day operational perspective. Because science teaches you science, right? It doesn't teach you kind of the softer side of how how these companies are built and how these companies operate. And I thought it was a great opportunity to do that. And ended up loving my years in my MBA. I loved actually thinking about business problems just as much as I loved thinking about science problems, which, honestly kind of surprised me. I didn't think that was going to be the case, but it really was. And, ultimately it led me to where I am now in my own career. But, it was a weird way to go and do the MBA. Most people do it after a PhD and not straight after undergrad, but, it worked out for me. I'm happy I did it for sure.
Yeah. And throughout your bachelor's and your master's, how much time did you have to dedicate to track, and how did that affect your education?
A decent amount. I wouldn't say it affected my education. I think when if you think about how it would affect your education, I think it's more so, would it be a detriment to your education? And I would actually argue that yes, track and being a collegiate athlete takes up a lot of time, because it does. I practice undergrad at Harvard was, 3 p.m. until, 6 to 7 p.m. every day. And, 3-4 hours out of your day, pretty much every day. And then New Mexico was earlier. It was more like 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. every day. But in reality, I think it just teaches you better time skills. Time management is a pretty critical skill set that a lot of college students don't have generally. And I think athletics and sports really teaches you that. And being a collegiate athlete definitely teaches you that. So I wouldn't say it was a detriment to my education. It affected it in that I learned better time management skills, and had to prioritize sleep, for example, and my training. But, I just wasn't coming home from class and watching Netflix for 4 hours and then going and starting my, problem sets at 10 p.m. Right. That's just, that's the real effect on you. But in terms of, being a detriment to my educational path, I wouldn't say it was. If anything, I'd say it was a benefit. And, I would encourage people to consider it if they're concerned about, time management. They'll consider about the amount of time it takes up, because, there's a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah. Moving on, why'd you choose to do a PhD? You said you had already decided that back in high school or during your bachelor's?
Yeah, so I think in chemistry at least, if I can't speak for some of the other STEM subjects. I know engineering and engineering, math, physics is a little different, but at least in chemistry, biology, these types of these fields, that if you look at the careers that most people, if you want a career in chemistry or biology, if you look at the jobs that most people have, they're scientists at a biotech or pharmaceutical company, or they're in kind of life sciences consulting, or they're in venture capital, those types of roles. If you look at those people, pretty much everybody has a PhD. And if you, unfortunately, if you don't have a PhD, you can hit a ceiling quickly in terms of where you can get to in your career. Not saying it's a ceiling for everybody. Definitely people can break through those ceilings and reach the same levels if you didn't have a PhD. It's just a little rarer for that to be the case. And I think we can maybe dig into that if you want to on kind of when you think about kind of what you learned from a PhD. But for me, I already had that in my mindset from kind of high school, that I wanted to kind of be in the sciences, chemistry, for my career. And the path most people take is chemistry undergrad, then you go do a PhD. Some people do a postdoc. I did not, but then you go into your career, and it's kind of just a path people take, and just kind of what it was. That was why I chose to do a PhD. Why I chose UCSF and chemical biology was largely, as I mentioned, I was interested in biotech pharma, and that reason versus academia, and that reasoning largely came from my undergrad lab experience. So the lab I worked in, the project I was on, was very translatable. In fact, the project that I work on Merck actually ended up acquiring the IP around the molecule I worked on, for a potential drug in AML. So I was very kind of inspired almost to think about how science can help public health, and that was ultimately what motivated me to go do science every day, thinking that, hey, if I can do science and it can help save someone's life or give someone a better quality of life, that's pretty amazing. So I chose UCSF largely because it's a very translatable program, in that most of the projects that PhD students work on are ones that have direct relationship to patients in the clinic, right? And that's why I chose UCSF. And the project I worked on was ended up being its own company. So I think it ended up working out in that case. So that's why I chose the specific program I did.
Yeah. I could be wrong about this, but I remember Googling a while ago universities with the highest research funding. I believe UC San Francisco was second only to Johns Hopkins in the entire world. How does that affect your research?
Yeah, so the UCSF is a well-funded university in general, and I think one of the reasons that being is it's so close to, so UCSF, the PhD program, is obviously associated with the UCSF hospitals, which is UCSF as a medical school is one of the top medical schools in the nation too. So, and it's very integrated with the hospital and the hospital system. So I'm not sure if it's the case, but I'm pretty sure it's close to the number. If you're a hospitalist or a physician at UCSF, and most of them have research groups on top of that. So very demonstrating how translatable a lot of the research is. And I think it's a testament to the system that UCSF has built, and the system that's there. It's really great. So it's a great place to get public money in terms of NIH, NSF, because the problems they're trying to solve are real world, helping patients, right? And then from an academic person in one of those labs, it gives you opportunities to work on projects and be creative. I was fortunate enough to be in a lab that had a lot of funding and didn't have funding issues. So it allowed me to be creative and work on projects that, almost side projects that weren't my main project, right? And a couple of those became papers in themselves, which in academia is a win, right? So it just allowed you to be creative without the constraints of how much does this cost, how much does that cost, right? Or within context, right? Just to be clear, I was not spending tons and tons of money off my main project, and I obviously thought about how much things cost, but it just allowed a little bit more freedom and flexibility that you would if your lab itself wasn't that well funded.
Yeah. Also for UC San Francisco, is it primarily a medical school slash, is it primarily for PhDs centered around chemistry, chemical biology, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I don't know the actual the size of the student population at UCSF and what proportion it is. So obviously it's a big medical school for sure. It's one of the best medical schools. In terms of the PhD programs and the professional programs, there's a number of them. I forget how many, but it's largely related to kind of chemical biology, drug discovery, those types of programs. So it's like, pharmaceutical sciences, pharmacogenomics, Tetrad, which is our biochemistry program. There was a biophysics, bioinformatics group, chemical biology. It's all kind of in the same world, and often, people will be in the same lab with a chemical biology person may have a biophysicist, PhD student in the same lab, right? A lot of these labs are kind of an amalgamation of the different studies that kind of come together for a project in one area. So yeah, they're all very similar. They all have the different twangs to them in terms of especially the coursework in nature, but in terms of the lab work, it's all very similar. And I could have joined a structural biology, which traditionally is a biophysics lab, or I could have joined a bioinformatics lab. It's kind of a open structure there at UCSF, which again I think is pretty beautiful.
Yeah. So coming out of your PhD, what was your first job?
Yeah, so actually my first job coming out of my PhD was the job I'm actually in right now in venture capital. During my PhD, I actually did a couple of venture creation type of roles. So I can take a step back to how I got into my career, I suppose, because that kind of dictates where I did my last couple of years part-time working during my PhD. So, as I mentioned, we did an MBA prior to my PhD. Came into my PhD thinking about life and how I approach projects with a mindset through business. So I thought about projects and experiments with opportunity cost, which maybe is not the best way to approach a PhD, but it was the way I approached my PhD. So realized pretty early on in my PhD that, especially once my PhD was in a good place, that I didn't really probably want to be at the bench after I graduated, but I still love thinking and talking about science. It's still, I think, is the best part of my day-to-day job right now. I just didn't enjoy physically being there at the bench every day, pipetting, for a number of reasons. But so, with my MBA background, I started to kind of just do some career exploration. I spoke to some people who had taken alternative careers, whether that was life sciences consulting, whether that was business development, and then some people in venture capital, and came across venture capital and thought, wow, this is really cool. It kind of couples in kind of business problems, how I thought through my MBA, but it's still very close to the science, and especially early science, or can be early science, depending on what type of VC you work for. And I thought this was really cool. So did some career exploration, met some people, and they kind of gave advice on how they got into the career. So I did a couple of internships. First one was with the tech transfer office at UCSF, just to doing traditional tech transfer work. Did that for about 9 months. And then the last 4 months of my time there, I got pulled into a project which is through UCSF Innovation Ventures, which is a system that they set up to help academics translate their projects into companies. And instead of kind of being hands-off, UCSF have kind of built this beautiful model where they actually help the physicians or the PIs build these companies and get them off the ground in-house at UCSF. So they'll help them with kind of IP strategy. They'll help them put together pitch decks, help think about kind of corporate strategy, and even help them introductions to venture capital firms to get funding. And they do this through a network of EIRs, which are also known as Entrepreneur in Residence. So I worked on a project called Rezo Therapeutics, which has now become Rezo Therapeutics, which is a spin out from Nevin Krogan and Kieran Shokat's lab. I spent 4 months doing that with EIR, whose name is Risa Stack. And then once we kind of rotated off that project, as they were looking to hire a full-time CEO and kind of go out and physically pitch this thing, Risa, who at the time was a venture partner at RA Capital, so she asked me to come jump across with her and work on a project she was working on over there at RA. So I worked 12 months working with Risa at RA Capital on a company that is now called Haiku Biosciences, which from now my new day in Nevada's venture fund, we actually invested in. So I've seen that from early days as it was transitioning from Ken Su's lab at UVA, who's now at UT Austin, all the way through now I'm a board observer on that company. So it's a full circle there. So that was my last 2 years of part-time. And then I mentioned earlier that my PhD work actually became a company. So I was there from true idea, technology, conception, and ideation through to then helping raise and see Jim pitch what became a company called Epibiologics, which is really partly based on my PhD work. So that was kind of my last 2 to 3 years of my PhD, which could be kind of jobs in themselves, but they were part-time whilst I was doing my day-to-day at the bench as well. And then realized that I loved venture capital, loved being around early stage biotech, early stage innovation. So I went out interviewing for jobs in VC and ended up here at Nevada's Venture Fund. And that's where I've been since I graduated, coming up on 3 years now. So I've been loving my time here.
So what's a day-to-day look like when you're working in a venture fund? Like, how much of your time are you devoting to actually looking at companies versus other things?
Yeah, so it's how I describe this. It's less so on a day-to-day, and I would describe kind of the different buckets of what my job is, and then depending on the time of year and the week, and I suppose the day, it's a different mix and a different ratio of all of those. So, as a junior person in the fund, one of my jobs is helping with new deal flow. So, at least every week we have a deal flow meeting. So we review, anywhere from, quiet week 5, busy week up to 20 decks that came in the previous week. So that would be new companies looking to pitch us. You're looking at 5 to 20 decks, reviewing those, seeing which ones we may want to talk to, and some we just, may be out of scope or not a good fit for us, and we just don't want to, not going to take an intro call with. So that's a decent portion, and that's always there. Every week we have pitches coming in, companies coming in. And then, once the company gets through that stage, we'll take an intro call. We decided we want to take a call. We form a kind of sub team. We'll take an intro call, and we take a couple of those a week. 1 to 2 of those a week, new pitches probably. So that's then meeting with the companies, hearing the pitch out for the first time, usually in a non-confidential basis, and then a certain I don't know what proportion of those keep moving forward. Then going to go into CDA and would kind of then do more work, and that's the point where you start doing diligence on doing diligence on those companies. So you go into CDA, you'd enter the data room, you'd start reviewing the company based on its fundamental science, its business plan, kind of the financial setting in terms of how much the company has raised in the past, how much they're going to raise, start vetting the people, and everyone, the number of companies that you have in diligence at any time, it varies. We try to keep it below 2 to 3 for each kind of person on the team, so you're not kind of doing too many at once. Right now, I have kind of one company we're decently deep in the diligence on. And once you get through that process, then it's kind of taking to your investment committee and then going through kind of either syndication or closing deals. So we have kind of one deal that's closing right now, that obviously went through this whole process that I just described over the last nearly 12 months now. It's been a long one, but we're nearly there, nearly across the line. And then for us at the venture fund here, once that investment has been made, we actually are active investors. So we always take board seats with our investments. And one really cool thing about MVF as a junior person here is that we get to take observer roles. So I'm an observer on 5 but about to be 6 companies. So every quarter, every company has a board meeting. Some have more frequent update meetings, kind of every month, every couple of weeks. But every quarterly they'll have a formal board meeting. So I always, once a quarter, I have a very busy period where I have my boards all around the same time, which are usually over 1 to 2 days each of those. Fortunately, most of mine are in Boston, some a bit of travel. So depending on the time of year, I'm busy with board work. Depending on the time of year, board work's a little quiet, between board meetings, kind of deep into diligence. Summers are usually pretty quiet in this industry, although recent summers have been a little busier, but usually a slightly quieter time in the summer, and you get a bit of a break. But it just depends on the time of the year, as I said. So the underlying team meetings, deal flow, that's always there. And then sometimes you're really busy because you have 3 companies deep in diligence. Sometimes all those companies all kind of fall away at the same time, and you find yourself kind of in between projects, and you have a couple of quieter weeks or 2. Just kind of, it varies. But,
yeah. So knowing that you like both the science aspect of things along with the business aspect, In your job, how much time do you spend looking at money and investing versus just looking at how good a company is on its own?
So the science versus the financials. I'd say we spend most of our time talking about the science. The financials in our industry are a little different, especially in the biotech investing at an early stage, as compared to kind of the med tech or even in the tech investing. In that a lot of those companies are revenue generating. Companies that we invest in are very far from revenue generating, very far. And probably in their lifetime, they never will be. I.e., they'll probably been acquired by the time they get a drug approved and therefore become a commercial company. So the financials that we look at is more related to two areas. One would be kind of valuation, how much the company is valued at today, how much will it be after whatever specific round that we'll be looking to invest in, and then how much ownership that buys us, and therefore how much control of the company that buys us. There's that arm, which is pretty, is not the most involved math, and it's kind of the same structure. The second one is more focused on the budget. So say a company is raising $50 million, it's looking to make sure that $50 million is the right amount that's going to get them to wherever they're trying to raise to. And if we think that is not the right endpoint, how much is it going to cost to get to the right endpoint? So is that going to be 60, 70 million? And then just breaking that down to make sure the numbers make sense, i.e. the 50 is actually going to get them to where they want to, because it doesn't always do that, right? So the financials aren't as big as in our industry. Those are the two main areas. For us, it's kind of really getting deep and understanding the science. Understanding, is the science and the value proposition they're proposing realistic? Is it real? And we do that by reading academic papers, talking to key opinion leaders in the field, whether that's kind of academics who do research, or it's people who've been in biotech, different companies doing something very similar. So we spend a lot of time on the science, and we're a pretty science-heavy fund. Not that we ignore the financials, because we definitely pay close attention to them. And just in terms of the time it takes between the two, it's definitely weighted a bit heavier towards the science.
Yeah. So for my last question, I wanted to ask what advice you would have for someone who's still in high school or is early in college wanting to go down a similar career path.
Yeah, I think if you want to go down the VC route, it's cool. As I love my job. I don't plan on leaving it anytime soon. Would be, I think, just explore. There's many ways into this industry. If anyone ever, I think, the best advice, I heard from a lot of people how to get into VC. Some told me the only way in is via consulting. And if anyone ever tells you the only way into pretty much any career path is there's only one way in, it usually means that was the way they got in. So I think just talk to a wide range of people. Everyone has a different way of getting into this industry. Some go through consulting, some got their Ph.D, some come from companies, some come from banking. There's such a broad range of how you get in. It's just really being curious about range of different sciences. So, you can be pigeonholed as kind of you are in your PhD in terms of the science that you do, but just think broadly, read broadly around different sciences and different modalities or different diseases, because, ultimately my day-to-day on venture capital is we'll have a new company come in and I've never even heard of that science before, right? So the critical thing is to be curious and excited about these new companies and these new concepts, and always looking to learn. So if you can kind of instill that early, it's always good. It'll be good training, and it will also allow you to, is that something you want to do? Because you don't get to go deep on any projects that deep. You kind of know a little about a lot, not a lot about a little. And some people prefer to go really deep on some subjects, and the only way to know that is by trying that, right? Try and go deep on a 1 or 2 subjects, which you would do in a PhD, for example. That's what I would say. Just explore. And there's many ways into this industry. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one way in.
Yeah. All right then. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Yes. Thanks, Rohan. Great to be here.